Hi everyone, welcome to today's lesson, which is the second in a series which we're teaching you how to code in VBA in Excel. And in this lesson, what we're going to be learning about is variables and getting user input. So this will be a relatively short lesson compared to the first one, and should be relatively straightforward. So the first thing we want to identify is what a variable actually means. Now, a variable is basically a placeholder or um, a placeholder where you can hold a value. So an example of a variable that you'll all be familiar with is in algebra. So the equation we have up on the screen has the value x. Now x can equal any value in this circumstances, and it will change the value of y. So that's an example where the value can change, which is why it's called a variable. Now the use of variables is very widespread in programming and critical making to making your programming interacting with the user. Okay, so let's move over and create our first variable. So I'm going to create a new sub called variables, and you'll see that I've got my code from the previous lesson up there. And the reason I'm doing that is because then sometimes I will take code that I've previously had and paste it in, which just makes it a bit easier. So the first thing we need to do is we need to define a variable, and the command for defining a variable is dim. Not a particularly logical command, but that's the command that's required. So I'm going to give that the name user input. Okay. Now, when you're defining your variables, they should be variables that are descriptive. Now, if I want to create a second variable, I can do it in two different ways. The first one is I can basically do a second line and create another user input and user input one. Or I can also put it in like that. Either way will work. I've done it both ways. It's not overly critical which way you do it. Either way will work. Now, the other thing that I'm just stressing here is that the way that I'm declaring variables is the simplest possible way you can do it. There are additional information where you can assign the type of variable, make it a Boolean value, make it a string value, which is necessary in certain circumstances. And you would do that by putting as string, for example, or as Boolean, as an example, or as integer, as some examples here. Now, I'm not going to worry about that a great deal at this stage, because for most things that we're doing here, I don't tend to worry too much about that. I'm sure there'll be plenty of people on the internet will tell me it's not the right way to do things, but I'm trying to keep things as simple as possible. Okay, now once you've created your variable, the next thing we want to be able to do is we want to assign values to those variables, and that's very straightforward. It is the same as what you would do when we're assigning values to cell references in the previous lesson. We can do that by adding either assigning a text, so I can put in text as an example. Now, and that's how you assign the value, just an equal sign and whatever the value is. So if I put in message box, okay, and then I display user input, okay, it's going to give me the value of whatever I assign. So I push play now, I should see the value text, and that's because that's what the value's been assigned. Now, the rules for assigning numbers are exactly the same as what we did in message box previously. You need talking marks around the text, and if you wanted to assign multiple values, you can put an and a 1, and obviously if it's a number, you do not need to put talking marks around it. So if we push play now, we've assigned both of those values. Now, the other things that you can assign as well is true, and you'll see that as soon as I put in true, it turns blue, and that's telling you that that's a command within the VBA language. So I can either have this true or false as well, which is known as a Boolean value. So any one of those sort of things can be utilized. So you can see now it's displaying true. So in short, they're pretty easy to define. And in addition to that, you can also take variables and assign values from a spreadsheet. So in the same way that in the previous lesson. So if I take a cell reference here and I assign it, and we better give that cell reference a value. So we're in the new spread. So if I give the value 23, for example, for cell A1 sheet 3, and then I go and it's sheet 3 cell A1, and then I go and push to play, what I'll see is the value 23. So that's basically how variables work. As I said, there's more that you can do with these things to make them more specific and with your programming, but just to keep it simple, that's basically the way that I do it. Now, one thing to be wary of is when you are declaring your variables, it is good programming practice to put them all right at the top. So, for example, if I had, as I was creating more and more code, and I needed a new variable, I would go back to the top of the code and place the variable at the top. Now, the reason for that is because the VBA editor reads it in the order in which the code appears. So if you use a variable before you assign it, then you'll get an error. Now, having got these variables, now we want to be able to use these variables to actually get user input. And the way that we're going to do that is by using an input box, which is a new command. Okay, so to do that, what we'll do is I'm just going to turn off my code for a bit, and I'm going to give a second line of data. I always like to keep my code and turn it off. That's what I tend to do. I always clean it up at the end, but okay. Now, once you've got user input, instead of assigning a worksheet, what we can do is we can put in input box. As soon as we do that, it gives you the structure of the input prompt. So, for example, I might do just something like give me a number. Okay. And once I do that, okay, then, and I'll turn this message box back on for this thing. Once I do that, what will happen when I run the code is it creates a input box similar to a message box, except that now we've got a value. So, for example, if I give it the value 4, now when I've assigned the value here to a variable, and then that variable is going to be displayed in the message box straight after, which is there. So you can see that using that, I can get values from the user, which means that my programming becomes significantly more powerful. Now, if I want to, for example, get 2 inputs, so let's say we want to get 2 inputs, we can take those values and we can use them to do calculations. So a simple example is that we have give me number, give a number, and we might put our second one as give another number. Okay, and then what we're going to do with the user input is we're going to multiply. Okay, and I've got to finish my expression there. Okay, so I'm going to take the 2 values and I'm going to multiply them and display them in a message box as an example. So give a number, and we might have 4, that's the first no. Give another number, and we might have 5, and when they're multiplied through, we get the value 20. Okay, so that's how we can get user input. Now, just to finish off, so that's all we're going to talk about today is we'll give you a task to do, and then I'll give you the solution. So the task that I'm going to get you to do is to get the user's name and get their age and display it in a message. So if you want to have a go at that and then pause the video, I will give the solution immediately after. Okay, so here comes the solution. So I'm going to create myself a new variable. I'm just going to call it user input. Okay. And the first job that I'm going to do, and as I said, you can do this in any particular order, is that we're going to create a message box, and we're just going to work out our message that we're going to display. And I'm going to leave a couple of placeholders in where the variables are going to go. So the first thing is we're going to give a message to the user. We want to say hi and leave a space, and the actual user, which will be the variable. So at this stage, to make it easy, I'm just going to put in the number 12, just as a placeholder. Hi, whoever. And then we're going to have a comma, and we're going to say you are, and then we need the age that they input, 34, just for the moment. And then we're going to put the last thing is space years old. Okay, so we're taking those two inputs from the user and we're placing them into a message box. If we run our message box now to make sure it looks all right, you are hi 12, you are 34 years old, so that's fine. And then we need to create our user input. Again, I'm going to be very lazy, and I'm going to reuse my code so I don't have to do much typing. Okay, so your first thing is you declare your variables, which I've already got done there. And then we want to say, for the first one, we want enter your name, so the user knows what they're being asked. And then the second prompt that we're going to ask for is enter your age. Okay, so once we have that, we then have these variables being assigned. So the name is going to appear where 12 is, and the second user input is going to appear there. Okay, and then I'm going to push play, and we get our name, Paul, and we get our name, age, 51. Okay, and there you can see it gives you the message. Now, the one thing I would advise is when you're doing it, which I've kind of broke my own rules here, is that you should be using variables that are more descriptive. User input 1 and user input 1 are not descriptive of what you are at and what the data is that's actually been entered. So it'd be much better to say username and then just change username in all the locations so that it's much more descriptive. And the same with user age. Okay, so we'll quickly do that, and then user age. Okay. And there we go. Okay, so I hope you found that useful. In the next lesson, we'll be starting to use these variables in a much more interesting way, which is using loops. I hope you found that useful, and go enjoy, or I hope you found it useful, and hopefully we'll see you in the next lesson. Cheers.